The house hadn't changed, but something about it felt different. As Victor stepped through the front door, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and faint traces of his mother's perfume wrapped around him like a ghost of his past. It had been months since he'd last visited. Months of missed calls and ignored texts, and now that he was here, an unsettling guilt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Then Max appeared at the top of the staircase, leaning casually against the banister, a slow, knowing grin spreading across his face. Well, look who finally decided to come home, he teased, descending the steps with effortless grace. Victor blinked, startled by how much had changed. Max was taller now, his body lean but defined, his once boyish features sharper, more striking. The glint in his dark eyes held something unfamiliar, something Victor couldn't quite name. Yeah, Victor muttered, forcing a chuckle as Max pulled him into a brief hug. The warmth of his brother's body lingered as he stepped back, sending an unexpected shiver down Victor's spine. He told himself it was nothing, just nostalgia. But deep down, a strange awareness had already begun to unfurl, creeping into the spaces between them. Victor had expected the weekend to be nothing more than routine. Lazy mornings, catching up over meals, maybe even playing a few old video games like they used to. But from the moment he arrived, something about Max felt different. It wasn't just the way he looked, though that was hard to ignore. The scrawny kid Victor had left behind had grown into someone entirely new, with a confidence that made it difficult to see him as the same younger brother he'd once teased mercilessly. His voice was deeper, his movements more self-assured, and every so often, Victor would catch him watching him, an unreadable expression in his eyes. That night, they settled on the couch, a forgotten movie playing in the background as they talked. Max stretched out beside him, long legs sprawled across the cushions. His body relaxed in a way that made Victor hyper-aware of their proximity. "You really don't visit enough," Max murmured, his head tilting slightly as he studied Victor. Victor exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know. Life just gets in the way." Max didn't look away. "You used to make time." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy and unspoken. The way Max was looking at him, it wasn't how a little brother should look at his older brother. There was something behind it, something daring. Victor swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile. "Well, I'm here now, aren't I?" Max smirked, eyes flickering over him slowly. "Yeah, you are." The air inside the house was thick with something Victor couldn't quite define. It wasn't just the warmth of familiarity or the nostalgia of being home again. It was something heavier, something electric. As the night stretched on, the easy flow of conversation between him and Max began to take on a different shape. The way Max laughed, a low, effortless sound, sent an unfamiliar pulse through Victor's chest. The way his fingers absent-mindedly brushed against Victor's arm as they passed the popcorn back and forth made his skin burn in ways he had no business feeling. By the time the credits rolled, Victor was restless. He shifted slightly, stretching his arms behind his head, trying to shake off the tension creeping along his spine. Max, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. He was watching Victor more than the screen, his lips curling at the corners as though he could see exactly what was going on in Victor's head. "Something on your mind?" Max asked, his voice smooth. "Teasing." Victor scoffed, turning to face him. "I could ask you the same thing." Max leaned in just slightly, his knee pressing against Victor's. "Maybe," he admitted, his tone low, intimate. "Or maybe I'm just enjoying the fact that I finally have your full attention." Victor inhaled sharply, heart slamming against his ribs. The way Max was looking at him, the way his presence filled the space between them, it was dangerous. And yet, Victor didn't move away. He didn't want to. Victor told himself it was just the house, the way old memories had a way of warping the air, making everything feel more intense. But as the evening unfolded, that excuse wore thin. Max had always been close, always been touchy in that easy, boyish way of his. But tonight it was different. It wasn't just the casual brush of his arm or the way he sprawled out on the couch, stretching, making himself larger, more present. No. It was the weight of his gaze, the way he held Victor's attention without needing to say a word. As Victor rinsed his glass in the sink, Max came up behind him, close enough that Victor could feel the heat radiating from his body. The scent of him, clean, fresh from the shower, mixed with something distinctly his, made Victor's pulse stutter. "You've been weird tonight," Max murmured, his voice just a little rough, teasing, but searching. Distracted, Victor swallowed, forcing a smirk. Maybe I just forgot how damn annoying you are. Max chuckled, the sound low and knowing. Liar, he said, voice barely above a whisper. His fingers ghosted over Victor's forearm, lingering just a second too long before he stepped back. But that's okay. I think I like this version of you. Victor exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to run from this or fall headfirst into whatever was happening between them. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Victor sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television while Max lounged beside him, scrolling through his phone. It should have been an ordinary night, just two brothers catching up, but the air between them was anything but ordinary. There was something charged about it, something neither of them were saying, yet both could feel. Victor wasn't sure when the shift had happened, but it was undeniable now. It was in the way Max stretched out beside him, his body too relaxed, too at ease, like he was waiting for something. It was in the way their knees touched, just barely, but neither of them moved away. Are you staying up late? Max asked, his voice softer than usual. Victor turned to look at him, finding Max already watching him, his gaze unreadable. I don't know, Victor murmured. Are you? Muck schmirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. The word hung in the air between them, full of quiet possibilities. Victor's throat felt tight. He could feel his pulse drumming in his ears. Could see the way Max's fingers tapped absently against his thigh, like he was working up the courage to say something else. But he didn't. Instead, Max reached for the remote, flipping the channel, acting as though nothing had changed. Victor wasn't sure if he was relieved or disappointed. All he knew was that nothing about this night felt the same as before. The house had settled into its familiar nighttime stillness, but Victor couldn't find comfort in it. He lay awake in the dim glow of his bedside lamp, his mind restless. He had thought spending the weekend with Max would be an easy way to reconnect, but the tension between them was unlike anything he had expected. There was an undercurrent in their conversations now, something unspoken but palpable, something that made Victor hyper-aware of every lingering glance, every casual touch. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Victor? Max's voice was quiet, hesitant. Victor swallowed hard, hesitating before answering. Yeah. The door creaked open, and Max stepped inside, clad in sweatpants and an old hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets. I couldn't sleep, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Victor shifted, sitting up against the headboard. Me neither. Max hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside fully, closing the door behind him. He crossed the room slowly, sitting at the edge of Victor's bed, close but not quite touching. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. I hate when you're not around, Max murmured suddenly. It's too quiet without you. Victor's chest tightened at the raw honesty in his voice. He didn't know what to say, only that something had changed between them, and there was no pretending otherwise. Max turned to look at him then, and for the first time, Victor didn't look away. The silence between them thickened, settling into the air like a storm waiting to break. Victor could feel the weight of Max's gaze on him, the space between them charged with something unspoken, something that neither of them had dared to name. It was a moment suspended in time, stretched taut with the tension of withheld words and concealed emotions. Max exhaled slowly, rubbing his palms together as if trying to gather his thoughts. It's weird, he said, his voice softer than usual. When you're not here, I feel like something's missing. And when you are, he trailed off, his fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. Victor swallowed. When I am, he prompted, his own voice barely above a whisper. Max's eyes flickered up to meet his, a quiet vulnerability in them that Victor had never noticed before, or perhaps had never allowed himself to see. I don't know. It just feels different. Victor could feel the unspoken words between them, the quiet confession in Max's voice. He could feel the way his own pulse quickened, the way the air in the room suddenly seemed thicker, heavier. His mind screamed at him to say something, to push past whatever invisible line they were towing, but fear gripped him in equal measure. Max was watching him carefully now, searching for something in Victor's expression, and as the space between them seemed to shrink, Victor realized, with startling clarity, that neither of them wanted to move away. The air between them crackled with an energy that neither of them had the words to explain, but neither of them could ignore. Victor felt his breath grow shallow as Max shifted closer, his gaze searching, hesitant yet unmistakably intense. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for one of them to break the silence, to cross the invisible boundary that had kept them contained for so long. "I don't want things to be weird between us," Max murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Yet it sent a shiver down Victor's spine. "They're already weird," Victor admitted, his throat tight, his pulse hammering in his ears. "We can't pretend otherwise." Max's lips parted slightly, his fingers twitching where they rested on the space between them. "I don't know what to do with this," he said honestly, his voice laced with frustration and something else, something raw. "But I don't want to ignore it." Victor swallowed hard. He didn't either. He never had. He'd spent so long convincing himself that what he felt was fleeting, was something he could smother, but now, sitting here in the dim glow of his childhood home with Max looking at him like this, like he was something Max had been trying not to want, he wasn't sure he had the strength to keep pretending. The silence stretched. Then, in a single moment of reckless honesty, Victor reached out, his fingers brushing against Max's hand. Max didn't pull away. Max's fingers tightened around Victor's almost imperceptibly, but the weight of that small touch sent a ripple through Victor's chest. It was as if something had been set in motion. Something neither of them could stop now. The space between them, once filled with uncertainty, had grown impossibly small. Max exhaled slowly, his breath uneven, his gaze fixed on where their hands met. "This feels different," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But not wrong." Victor swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah," he murmured, his heart hammering. "Not wrong." Max turned toward him, their faces mere inches apart now. And for the first time, Victor let himself really look at the warmth in Max's eyes, at the slight parting of his lips, at the hesitance warring with need. And then, as if gravity itself was pulling them together, Max leaned in. The kiss was slow at first, uncertain but not hesitant. It was careful, exploratory, as if both of them were testing the depth of something they'd been too afraid to name. But as soon as Victor responded, as soon as he let his hand slide up to the nape of Max's neck, a quiet groan left Max's lips, and suddenly the restraint shattered. Max pulled him closer, deepening the kiss with a hunger that had been caged for too long. And Victor, for the first time, let himself fall. The morning light streamed through the half-closed blinds, painting golden streaks across the room. Victor lay on his side, his body still humming with the lingering warmth of Max beside him. For a long moment, he simply watched the slow rise and fall of Max's chest, the way his lashes fluttered slightly in sleep, the faint curve of his lips, as if even in his dreams. He felt the remnants of what had happened between them. Victor's mind was a storm of emotions. Last night had shattered every boundary, rewritten every unspoken rule they had lived by. He should have felt uncertainty, maybe even guilt, but he didn't. Instead, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of belonging, as though this was where he had been meant to end up all along. Max stirred, blinking against the morning light before his gaze found Victor's. There was no hesitation, no regret, just quiet understanding. He reached out, fingers tracing the line of Victor's jaw. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. Victor smiled, leaning into his touch. "Morning." No words were needed. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. Life is full of unexpected emotions, relationships, and moments that challenge what we thought we knew about ourselves. The key to navigating these complexities is honesty, both with yourself and with those around you. Suppressing feelings or avoiding difficult conversations can create inner turmoil. But embracing your truth, no matter how complicated, allows for growth and clarity. Relationships, whether romantic or platonic, thrive on mutual understanding and respect. If you ever find yourself in an emotionally challenging situation, take a step back, reflect, and communicate openly. The path may not always be clear, but authenticity and self-awareness will always guide you forward.